first of all, Mac is somebody that I have been close with for a while, and I've been in IT in Detroit for a long while, guys, and to come here today and see an event like this with all of these people in the audience so intently part of this community now is really special for somebody like me who's been in the game for a while, and it wasn't always this way. You couldn't even come to anything like this in Detroit. So the fact that we are here now is really special to me. My kids are here, and I just want to give, if we can, all of us can give some love to Mac and the team to put this together, please. So, yeah, and Jessica touched so many key points in her talk about the companies that are sitting on huge amounts of data. I happen to work for one of those companies. General Motors happens to have a thing or two to say about autonomous driving and where they're moving in that area. But it's really another area that there's such low-hanging fruit in terms of career path is security, right? And you can't have a discussion around security without understanding what identity is. And today my focus will be mainly on the customer aspect of identity, and that means the person that will download your app off of the App Store and start using it. A lot of the early years of my career, I focused on the enterprise side of identity, and so those of you who joined larger companies and you went through your HR processes, there's a lot of things that happen in the background to give you a laptop, to give you a badge, to give you access to all of the systems that you use to do whatever you do in your companies. Identity management is the underpinning of all of that on the enterprise side. So I did that for the first 10, 12-ish years of my career. And most recently, I've gotten into enabling identity for our customers. And I'm going to talk today mostly about why it's important and why you guys as developers need to have a keen eye around what an identity service is, what it provides for your apps that you develop. And ideally, I would expect that you guys are going to be using these if you haven't been already. So hopefully that'll be something of value to you. So let me get a slide going. Okay, so do I get something up here maybe so I can help guys? Or I can just turn around either way. Yeah. I'm cool here. I can just do it here. I'm cool. So identity for customers is the gateway to you as a service provider, as an app developer. It's how you gain their trust, right? How many of you have downloaded an app off the App Store and it comes off so cheesy that you're like, you know what, this looks shaky. I'm not giving any of my information to this kind of service, right? So putting forth a user experience that is top shelf, that is in alignment with everything else that you see from the major providers on app stores is really important if you want to get the uptake on the services that you're creating, right? So it's the number one thing. It's the first impression. It's something that you always want to get right. So it's your first connection with your customer. And along with that, there's a couple of key processes that come along with identity where how do you register a customer? How do you allow them to give information and make them comfortable enough to give, even if it's an email address, to enter information into your service and to allow it to be captured? And if you're going to capture more profile information, do you want to, is it the best thing to give them a whole huge form that has 20 fields on it that you want them to fill out, or maybe do you just get their email and then capture their information as you go further into your experience? Those are things that you end up figuring out on the identity side of it, where you don't want to challenge your customers and you don't want to make them think too hard to be able to get access to your service, right? You want to be able to do quickly, allow them to get authenticated, get the minimum amount of information from them, and that's called, the whole process of capturing more information about them is called progressive profiling. Strong auth and MFA, I'll get into how many are familiar with what happened at the Iowa caucus? Okay, I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I just want to see how many of you guys are familiar with that. So, and then consent and privacy is another huge area where, data is money, right? I mean, Google and everyone else has proven that data is money, and the fact that you are capturing and using data about the users who are using your services is something that you have to give account of, right? You have to be able to tell your customers that, hey, I'm going to use your data, and I'm going to use it for this purpose, and I need your permission to allow me to do that. So that is consent, and there's a series of enablers in these platforms that support that as well. Multiple channels, right? So the identity platforms of today allow you to connect really any type of an app or client to it, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's web, and in my case, whether you're connecting from inside of a vehicle. There's industry standard ways that all of those services can connect to an identity platform and get somebody authenticated. And you want that experience to be consistent across all of those channels. It's very important. You don't want to present one kind of a login experience for somebody in their web environment versus another kind of a login experience on your mobile app. You really want that user experience to be very consistent, very familiar to the user. I talked about profile. I talked about progressive profiling, fraud detection. So Jessica talked about AI and where it is and why you should get involved in it. Very important. And I would also give as an example that there is machine learning and AI in any cloud identity service that is actually providing fraud detection. It is very important in a lot of ways. So, for example, if someone logged in, and the identity platforms know everything about you when you log in, right? They know what kind of a device you're on. They know where you're logging in from. They know what apps that you have accessed previously. And for example, if you have a login that was logged at 8 a.m. on Monday morning in Detroit, and then that same account was used at 9 a.m. In Shanghai, China, that probably is a red flag, right? That's something that you want to know about as a user, that, hey, we've noticed something strange about your account. We're going to lock you and force you to verify yourself, or we're going to actually lock you and tell you that you need to come and address this issue that we've seen some very strange logins. So that's, Google provides some of that now, and all of the key identity services provide that, and everything that runs behind that is all AI-based, right? It's them with their services profiling every single login that happens, whether it's Azure, whether it's Amazon or anywhere else. They have the computing horsepower to capture every single event that happens during a login process. And then they can turn that around and use that to the benefit of their customers, where it lets them know when there's strange things happening, when there are breaches. For example, is anyone familiar with Have I Been Owned or Have I Pwned? Anybody familiar with that service? So that is, you hear so much about breaches, and what ends up happening is, people will extract data from these companies, and then they'll just put it out on the internet for everyone to get access to. Well, this service has actually harvested all of those breaches, all of the information in those breaches, and now they're offering it as a service so that you can actually check. You can hit one of their APIs, and then you can check, is this identity been exposed in a breach before, right? And that's something you'd want to tell your customers, right? That's something you'd want to be able to say, hey, you know what? Your identity was exposed in a breach. You might want to make sure that you turn on multi-factor authentication. You might want to make sure that you change your password and use strong password in your profile as you move that forward. So those are reasons why leveraging, because the main point here is that you don't want to have to build these in your apps yourself, right? There are people who are better at it than you, and if you have to give them a bit of the cost to roll out your service, it is hugely to your benefit to leverage these platforms and the expertise that they provide. So that's the recommendation here. Single sign-on is another aspect that is important. If you have multiple services that you provide, or if you want to allow your customer to leverage Facebook for their login or leverage Google for their login, that is something that is available, and then you can give them the ability to single sign-on to multiple services because you're using that same identity. That's called, Facebook and Google are called identity providers. They are already out there and they do authentication as a service already. So that's kind of the major points in customer identity management that are benefits and why you should be aware of it and take advantage of it in your apps. So why should you care? So, and this is a really funny thing and about the Iowa caucus because, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, and then I woke up the next day and then you hear that none of the precincts were able to report their results and what happened. And what ended up happening is they decided to roll out their reporting of results through a mobile app. And the mobile app, and it was, it's 1,300 precincts, so it's not like it's global scale, but when they tried to use the mobile app to report their precinct results, the app failed. And the reason that it failed, and again, I'm not knocking, this is not a knock against coding boot camps, but I guess the Democratic Party hired some guys who were like a couple weeks out of a coding boot camp to write this app, and it ended up going really bad for them, obviously. So, and they even tried to use one of the major identity services for logging in to this app, but it just, it didn't happen for them, and it was unfortunate because it was a lot of bad publicity there, but that's why that you don't want to build these services in the app yourself. You want to use a service who already has industry strength behind it to be able to give you those key benefits. I talked about single login to multiple channels, and the privacy laws are a really big deal. California already has a privacy law on the books that requires companies to give the notification to the customer and the ability for you to respond to them when they say, I'd like you to delete my data from your service. You have to do that within a specific amount of time, and you have to give them evidence of that. So there are more states that are doing that, and that's going to be like a really important thing that you'd be able to respond to because the fines are significant if your company is found to not have responded to the privacy laws. So that's something, if you're servicing customers, something you want to really be aware of. Okay, so what am I going to show? So first, let me talk about, at a high level, the architecture that's involved. These platforms provide all, and what I will show today is Microsoft Azure, Azure Active Directory, B2C, but there are several out there that provide all of the same capabilities that I'm going to show today. And I would encourage you to go out and take a look at them and kick the tires on them because they all give free levels of service that you can leverage. And it would be something that would be a very similar experience to what I showed today. It depends on what kind of app you want to test with, but all of them, they're all really good. They have a lot of educational content behind them. So services like Auth0, Okta, or others that are key identity services that you can start right up and integrate them into your apps, similar to how I would be doing it today. So in terms of the kind of services that you'll get, social registration, I talked about that. If you want to be able to allow your customers to sign in with Facebook, Twitter, Google accounts, all of these services provide that out of the box. I have a small example of that I can show you. The risk engine is essentially the AI that is behind the scenes that does all of the profiling of your login activity, and it allows you to understand what's happening with your login. And it also allows you to throw up challenges. So in your app, and if you decide that you detect strange activity when the user is within your app, you can have the ability to throw up a multi-factor challenge. You can have the ability to say, you know what, if you're trying to do some kind of an e-commerce activity, maybe I should have you revalidate yourself before I allow you to do that. And that's where the risk engine is in place to allow you to kind of set that kind of a flag, well, within your app experience, so that if you're dealing with any kind of a finance or a high sensitivity transaction, you want to get them to validate themselves before they do anything. Adaptive authentication is kind of in line with the risk engine. Account validation, a lot of services will actually, if you're capturing a lot of personal information about somebody, and today there's a whole lot of bot creation activity that happens, or a lot of fake accounts that get created. You can actually have a call out to APIs that will validate the personal information that was provided, and they can match that against other data that they have, and they can tell you if this is likely to be a real person or not, right? And you have to pay for that, but that's also features that are in the platform that you can take advantage of. And being able to, I mentioned the social identity providers, client application types. And there's a lot of standards that are out there, and I'll get into a few of them, but if you're developing any type of an app today, one of my homework tasks for you guys would be make sure that you're familiar with OpenID Connect and OAuth. That is what all web and mobile apps are using from a protocol perspective, and that's something that you should be able to be very familiar with and kind of adhere to it as you're developing your solutions. Another solution that is a bit younger, but is gotten a lot of adoption recently is called FIDO. And FIDO is essentially a standard around multi-factor authentication. And what you're going to start to see are that the web browsers are going to support passwordless login features, right? So if you go to Google and Microsoft and others support the ability for you to actually configure your account where you don't even need to enter a password anymore. Right? You can map into your mobile phone. They can send push notifications to your mobile phone. And that is a huge win from a user experience perspective, because if, everyone knows how much of a pain it is to enter a password on your mobile phone, right? So FIDO is a key standard there. SMS is something that we're going to have to be weary of going forward, because there's a lot of SIM jacking that are happening on mobile phones, where if you have multi-factor set up that is sending SMS codes to your phone, people are able to basically hijack your phone account and have the SIM card reassigned. And so that's something that you'll need to make sure, all of you need to make sure that you go out and contact your mobile phone companies and make sure that there's a special PIN that they use, that they require before anybody can change anything on your account, because that's something that is going to start happening more from a security perspective. Those are things you want to be aware of. I think that is about what I wanted to cover. Let me get into the demo. We good? All right, there we go. All right, so I'm not a developer. I used to be one. I am now what we call an architect. So I train developers. I show them how to use these security tools, and that is my demo will be about basically a basic setup of how to do a validation in Azure Active Directory. So let me get started with that. So how many of you are familiar with either Azure or Google Cloud or Amazon in terms of you set up services on them before? Good, yeah, that's good. Good sign. Good sign. Okay, so let me. Most companies, and this wasn't the case 5 years ago. Most companies, because of the dependency of Microsoft, was able to take advantage of the footprint they had in most large companies with Office. And they basically turned Office from an app you install on your desktop to this cloud service. And by converting all of their customers into the Office 365 customers, they had to put a directory behind that. And so Azure Active Directory is kind of what spawned out of that. And they have turned themselves pretty much into a leader in terms of providing secure identity and directory services. Let me make sure I'm staying on point. Okay, good. I'm familiar with this. There are many others. I'll touch on a few of those. And actually, in my GitHub repo, let me see if I have that available. Yeah, I set up the very basic demo here in the repo, and it's a very basic walkthrough of how to get set up on registering a web app and setting up a user flow. I will add more to this because I know there's a lot of content out there in terms of how you would connect to a web app, how you connect to your mobile, native mobile app. So I can add a lot of that as well here as we get set up. So, all right, so now I'm in the administrative portal for Azure Active Directory. I want to create a new application. So I did that, and I created an application called Hacking with the Homies app. The only thing that's really important here that you would want to know for your application is you need the client ID of the app, because that client ID allows you to, when you call out to authentication, you need to present that client ID as part of what you call to Azure to say, I am trying to authenticate a user to my app. And so that client ID is here, and I'm setting up the fact that this is a web app. And implicit flow is one of the flows. I don't have the time to get into OpenID Connect and OAuth is a topic all in its own. And that is what I train our internal developers on the usage of that as a protocol. Implicit flow is a browser-based flow of how you leverage OAuth. It's come under some fire recently because when it was created, a lot of the security technologies aren't as mature as they are now. And so there are other flows under the OAuth protocol that you probably should focus on, but it is still supported here. And the reply URL is very important because that is the URL that gets sent to when the user authenticates. So what happens is your user will go to a login page that's actually hosted on Azure. And then once that user successfully logs in, it will send that user back to wherever your application is hosted. And that reply URL is where the user will get sent. In this example, I'll show you what happens when it goes to this URL, because we want to look at the token that gets created for this user. Okay. That is the setup of the web app. And Azure sets up their login experience in a feature called user flows. And a user flow is essentially a set of logic around the experience that you want the user to have. And so, for example, they have different types of user flow. One is for password reset, another one for profile editing if you need to give them a web page to do editing of their user profile. All of that is kind of available off the box. The one that I will demonstrate here is called sign up and sign in. And if you go to any service today, you'll always see in the login box, you'll basically have the ability to log in, and then you'll have a link there that says, are you not a member or are you not a user already? Click this link to log in. And that's kind of the logic that they are following here, where they give you the ability to set that up. And you can also then go into your application configuration, then set up different information around, I want to enable multi-factor authentication. I want to control how long my tokens are active. What you don't want to have happen is you issue tokens to your application and then they don't have an expiry time, because if you end up getting, if you have a compromise on your mobile phone or on your web app, and someone actually gets that token, they can reuse it and present it to your application, and they wouldn't have to log in again. So you want to be careful and make sure that there is a very short lifetime for your tokens. Other settings here, session behavior. You can also set, for password, you can set the complexity of how strong you want the user to have a password. You can make it if it's 8 and one uppercase, one lowercase, you can make it the simple complexity, or you can go stronger, or you can get longer. You can force them to have longer passwords, or you can even define your own custom complexity. These are all kinds of properties that you can set within your application. I talked about identity providers, and here I'm just doing basic email sign up, where you basically just enter an email address. That email address gets validated, and then you're able to sign into the service. The very interesting aspect of it, though, now is that because you are running on top of a directory has information, right? It has information about your user, and then you can define more information. So in the user attributes, you can say what information gets presented back to the application. So you're doing more than just getting a user ID and password from the user. You're actually able to then present everything that you know about the user in a single token, and that will go back to your application to get validated. And application claims is kind of the same way. When you are giving the user a sign-up form, you have to decide, exactly what kind of information are you going to capture from them. And in this case, I'm indicating these attributes will get captured. It's probably too many for a sign-up form. And then you also have the ability to set, custom page layouts for your login form, right? You could use, Microsoft in this case gives you some, and you'll see some very basic and probably undesirable ones that you might not want to use publicly. But if you wanted to design your own login form, obviously, if you wanted to have your own login form in your mobile app, however you wanted to do that, you have the ability to customize that and set that for your app. So just running this user flow, I will set the application. And the cool thing about the way that Microsoft set up Azure B2C is that it allows you to separate the user flow from the application. So you may have multiple web apps, mobile apps defined in your environment, and you may want to reuse the user flow against all of those web apps, or you may have different user flows that you want to use against your web apps. And you have the ability to kind of mix and match which user flow goes against which app configuration. The domain is something that actually represents the login URL of your login page, right? So it arbitrarily creates this domain. It does give you the ability to set up custom domains if you wanted to do that. So let's run the user flow. And okay, so this, I tried to take the image of the Detroit Black Tech and add it to the login form. You see how successful that went. But I just wanted to show that this is kind of the basic, very basic version of their login form, and you have the ability to customize this. I'm not going to go forward with this, but what I will do then is say, hey, let's change that to something a little less killer on your eyes, and they have this ocean blue template. And let's see if we can run this one, and let's see here. Okay, well, it still uses the ugly graphic in the background, but the login form is actually cooler. So here is then just a basic user flow where it gives you a login screen, and if I wanted to have more identity providers on the screen, I could do that. So I'm going to log in and try to see if this login will work. And if you know me at all, and you know the Marvel geek that I am, you're not surprised that I would use a name called Peter Parker. Okay, so now this is kind of the key aspect of the login. That was a successful login, and now this site is a site that allows you to decode. Is anyone familiar with JOTS, Json Web Tokens? Okay. The Json Web Token is essentially the encapsulation of who your user is and how you can get information about that user and provide your user experience. So in this example, you get all of the name information, but there's also interesting information that tells you the type of token it is, The algorithm that gets used here, this is a RSA 256 algorithm, which is based on a public and private key. And it also could say HS 256, which is based on just a client secret. And there's other information about the token, and like who the identity provider is, and what time did they authenticate, and basically anything that you need to have included in the token about the user. You can include that here, and then that is now available to your application to use and provide their experience. So the other thing about JOT tokens is important, and this service, this is basically what gets presented in the URL when it gets sent to your app. This is the encoded version of that token. And you'll notice the red, blue, and green, because most JOT tokens, all JOT tokens actually have what's called the header, the payload, and the signature, right? And anybody, and this is the guidance to you guys, that when you get JOT tokens received in your app, you should validate it. You should validate the signature. You'll have all identity providers give you the ability to look up their public key, and once you validate against their public key, you should be able to decode that token and trust that the token that you're working with came from your trusted identity provider. So that's something that you very much want to learn how to do as you're developing your solutions, to make sure you know how to validate tokens. So that's kind of the very basic experience of how you set up an application, how you set up the user experience, and then how you get the information into your app, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a web app, or whatever it is, on how you can then provide your experience to the user. Okay. And now that I got the high sign about time, I am going to wrap it, and I will open it for questions. I hope that was helpful.